Daniel Chen stared at the message on his phone, his thumb hovering over the delete button. The text had come through at 2 in the morning, waking him from the kind of restless sleep that had become routine over the past 6 months. "Help me, please," it read. "I need $70 for Sophie's formula. I'll pay you back Friday when my check comes. I'm begging you." The number wasn't saved in his contacts, but something about the desperation in those words made him pause. He sat up in bed, the silk sheets cool against his skin, and read it again. Sophie. The name caught in his chest like a hook. He didn't know anyone named Sophie, but the raw need in that message felt uncomfortably familiar. It reminded him of voices he'd spent years trying not to hear, the kind that came from people one paycheck away from disaster, people his company's algorithms had once been designed to help before shareholders demanded different priorities. Daniel typed a response. "I think you have the wrong number." "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. Please forget I sent that. I must have mistyped. He should have left it there. A wrong number, a stranger's crisis, none of his business." But Daniel found himself typing again. "Is your baby okay? Do you need help?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message came through. "Why would you help someone you don't know?" Daniel looked around his penthouse bedroom, at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco, at the original Rothko on the wall, at the emptiness that money had filled but never quite satisfied. He thought about Claire, about the divorce that had been finalized exactly 183 days ago, about how she'd looked at him in the lawyer's office with something worse than anger. Pity. "Because I can," he typed, "and because someone's baby shouldn't go hungry." The response took longer this time. "I'm Laura. My daughter is 6 months old." My daughter. Her father left when I was 4 months pregnant. I lost my job as a paralegal 3 weeks ago when the firm downsized. I'm working food delivery now, but the car keeps breaking down, and I can't afford to fix it, and also buy formula. And my unemployment check doesn't come until Friday, and I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. Daniel read the message twice, then looked at his phone's banking app. What kind of formula does Sophie need? Similac Sensitive, the blue container. But really, you don't have to do anything. I'll figure it out. I always do. He knew that particular brand of pride, the kind that came from being knocked down so many times that accepting help felt like admitting defeat. His own mother had worn that same dignity like armor when they'd lived in a studio apartment in Oakland, when she'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and in school, when she'd refused every offer of assistance, even as she wore herself down to nothing. "Send me your information," he typed. "I'll have formula delivered to you today." The pause was longer this time. "I can't accept that. I don't know you." "You're right," Daniel wrote. "But I know what it's like to be hungry. And I know what it's like to watch someone you love make themselves sick trying to provide. Let me do this. No strings attached." Another long pause. Then an address in Oakland, not far from where his mother had raised him, actually. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, still the same mix of working families holding on by their fingernails, still the same liquor stores with barred windows, still the same sense that one bad break could send everything tumbling down. Daniel didn't just order formula. He ordered diapers, baby food, wipes, everything he could think of that a 6-month-old might need. Then he sat in his empty bedroom and wondered what he was doing, whether this was genuine compassion or just another way of trying to fill the space Claire had left behind, whether helping a stranger could somehow balance out the ways he'd failed the person who'd mattered most. His phone buzzed again an hour later. Laura's message was brief. The delivery just arrived. "This is too much. I can't possibly accept all of this." "Yes, you can," he replied. "Consider it an investment in Sophie's future." "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "Nobody's this kind without wanting something." The question was fair. In Daniel's world, every transaction had terms, every gesture had an angle, every kindness came with invisible strings attached. He'd learned that lesson young and learned it well, had built an empire on understanding exactly what people wanted and how much they'd pay for it. But sitting alone in his penthouse at 3 in the morning, looking at messages from a woman he'd never met about a baby he'd never seen, he found himself wanting to be someone different. Someone who helped because it was right, not because it served a purpose. "I'm doing this because you asked," he typed. "Because you needed help and I could provide it. That's all." "Thank you," she wrote back. "You have no idea what this means." But he did know. He remembered being 7 years old and watching his mother cry quietly in the bathroom because she couldn't afford both his asthma medication and that month's rent. He remembered the shame and the fear and the desperate hope that somehow things would get better. He remembered the caseworker who'd helped them, who'd bent rules and pulled strings and never asked for anything in return, who'd told his mother that sometimes people help because they remember what it was like to need helping. Over the next few weeks, the texts continued. Laura would send updates about Sophie, little messages that weren't asking for anything, just sharing. "She's sleeping better now. She smiled at me today for the first time. The formula you sent is perfect for her stomach." Daniel found himself looking forward to those messages, to those small windows into a life so different from his own, yet somehow more real than anything in his carefully constructed world. He learned that Laura was 28, that she'd been studying for the bar exam when she got pregnant, that her ex-boyfriend had blocked her number and moved to Portland without leaving a forwarding address. She'd been working 60-hour weeks at the law firm, trying to save enough for childcare so she could finish her degree when the layoffs came. Now she was delivering food orders 12 hours a day with Sophie strapped in a car seat in the back, racing between restaurants and apartment complexes, hoping the car would hold together long enough to make next month's rent. Daniel didn't tell her who he was. Not exactly. He said he worked in tech, which was true enough. He didn't mention that Chen Digital Solutions employed 8,000 people across 4 continents, that his personal net worth had crossed the billion-dollar threshold 3 years ago, that he'd been featured on the cover of Forbes twice. He liked being just Daniel to her, not Daniel Chen, the CEO, not the man whose name appeared on buildings and scholarship programs, just someone who cared whether her daughter had enough to eat. A month after that first text, Laura sent him a photo. It was slightly blurry, taken in what looked like a small, shabby apartment, but Sophie's face was clear. Round cheeks, bright eyes, a toothless smile that made Daniel's chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since before Claire left. "She wanted me to show you who you've been helping," Laura wrote. "This is Sophie. She's thriving because of you." Daniel looked at that photo for a long time. He thought about calling Laura, about telling her the truth, about offering the kind of help that could change everything. A job at his company, an apartment in a better neighborhood, childcare, tuition for law school. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of Claire's accusations, that he'd tried to solve every problem with money, that he'd forgotten how to just be present with someone without trying to fix them. Maybe it was the fear that if Laura knew who he really was, these honest, unguarded conversations would end, replaced by the careful distance people always put between themselves and billionaires. So instead he wrote back, "She's beautiful. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you," Laura replied, "for everything. For not making me feel small for needing help, for not making this weird or complicated, for just being kind." That night, Daniel sat in his home office and thought about kindness, about how rarely he'd practiced it in his climb to the top, about how easily he'd justified the layoffs and the cost-cutting and the ruthless efficiency that had made his company so profitable. He thought about the paralegal named Laura, who'd lost her job at some nameless law firm, who might have worked for one of his subsidiaries or one of his competitors, who was part of an economic system he'd helped create and now benefited from enormously. His phone buzzed again. "I need to tell you something," Laura had written. "I got called for an interview tomorrow. It's just a receptionist position at a dental office, but it's Monday through Friday, regular hours, and they have on-site childcare. I wouldn't have been able to even consider it without your help, without knowing Sophie was taken care of. I wanted you to know that you didn't just help us survive, you helped us hope again." Daniel read that message 3 times, feeling something shift inside him, some calculus of worth and purpose that had been broken for longer than he wanted to admit. "Congratulations," he wrote back. "You're going to do great." But even as he sent the message, he knew this couldn't last, this anonymous kindness, this distance. Eventually, she would ask questions. Eventually, he would have to decide whether to tell the truth or disappear from her life entirely. Eventually, this fragile connection would face the reality of who they both were and the impossible distance between their worlds. What Daniel didn't know was that tomorrow would force that decision sooner than he'd imagined, in a way that would make everything infinitely more complicated. The coffee shop was in downtown Oakland, a neighborhood Daniel recognized from his childhood but hadn't visited in years. Laura had suggested meeting there after her interview, said she wanted to thank him in person, and Daniel had agreed before fully considering what that meant. Now, sitting at a corner table with his baseball cap pulled low and his most anonymous clothes, a plain grey sweater and jeans that probably cost more than Laura made in a month, he felt ridiculous. Like he was playing at being normal, pretending to be someone he hadn't been in decades. She walked in, carrying Sophie in a worn baby carrier, and Daniel recognized her immediately from the small profile picture she'd eventually added to her messages. She was younger than he'd expected, with tired eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing what was clearly her interview outfit, a navy blazer over a white blouse, both showing signs of careful maintenance and repeated wear. She scanned the coffee shop nervously, and when her eyes landed on Daniel, there was a moment of confusion before recognition settled in. She approached the table slowly, almost cautiously, and Daniel stood, suddenly unsure of the protocol for meeting someone you'd been helping anonymously for weeks. They settled into an awkward greeting, and Laura shifted Sophie on her hip before sliding into the chair across from him. "You look different than I imagined," she said, her voice softer than it had seemed in her texts. "Younger, maybe." Daniel smiled, though it felt tight. "You too. How did the interview go?" Laura's face lit up in a way that made her exhaustion briefly disappear. "I got the job. They offered it to me on the spot. It's not much, $16 an hour, but with the childcare included, it means I can actually start building something again." She looked at Sophie, then back at Daniel. "I wanted to tell you in person, to thank you properly. You changed our lives." The weight of her gratitude pressed on Daniel like a physical thing. "I didn't do that much. Just helped with some supplies." "You did more than you know," Laura said firmly. "You treated me like a person, not a charity case. You never made me feel ashamed for needing help. That mattered more than the formula." They talked for an hour, careful conversation that danced around deeper questions. Laura told him about the interview, about Sophie's latest developmental milestones, about her plans to save enough to eventually finish law school. Daniel listened, offering encouragement, asking questions, playing the role of supportive friend while the truth of who he was sat between them like an unexploded bomb. It was Sophie who ultimately shattered the pretense. The baby had been getting fussy, and Laura had pulled out her phone to show her a video that usually calmed her down. But as she scrolled, she paused, her face going still. She looked at her phone, then at Daniel, then back at her phone. The article she'd accidentally pulled up had a photo of Daniel at a tech conference, standing on stage in front of the Chen Digital Solutions logo. his face unmistakable despite the formal suit and professional styling. Laura's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally something that looked like betrayal. "You're Daniel Chen," she said quietly. The Daniel Chen. There was no point in denying it. Daniel met her eyes and nodded. "I am." Laura's hands trembled slightly as she put her phone down. "All this time. You've been—" She gestured vaguely at the phone, at the article, at the disconnect between the anonymous helper she'd known and the billionaire sitting across from her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel had prepared himself for this moment, had rehearsed explanations in his head, but sitting across from Laura, watching her process the deception, all his prepared words felt hollow. "Because I wanted to help without it being complicated. Because people treat me differently when they know. Because I liked being just Daniel to you." "Just Daniel," Laura repeated, and there was an edge to her voice now. "You weren't just Daniel. You were lying to me, letting me pour my heart out about my problems while you—" she gestured helplessly, "while you have more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. Do you have any idea how that feels? How small that makes me feel?" "That wasn't my intention," Daniel said, hearing how inadequate it sounded, even as he said it. "I genuinely wanted to help." "Help or feel better about yourself?" Laura shot back. "Was I your charity project? Your way of feeling good about being a billionaire?" The accusation stung precisely because Daniel had asked himself the same question more than once. He thought about Claire, about how she'd left him, not because he'd been cruel or unfaithful, but because he'd become someone who solved problems instead of understanding them, who threw money at everything, including their marriage, who'd forgotten how to simply be present. He thought about the 8,000 employees he'd laid off 2 years ago to boost quarterly profits, about the communities his company's automation had disrupted, about all the ways his success had been built on optimization and efficiency rather than compassion. "Maybe that's part of it," he admitted quietly. "Maybe I needed to feel like I could still help someone without it being a transaction. But Laura, meeting you, talking to you these past weeks, it became more than that. You reminded me of who I used to be, of what matters." Laura looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe. Or truth. Sophie had started crying in earnest now, and Laura automatically shifted into soothing mode, rocking her gently, murmuring comfort. The practiced ease of it, the automatic love, reminded Daniel of his own mother, of the fierce protection that had surrounded him even when there was nothing else to give. "I need to go," Laura said finally, standing up and gathering her things with one hand while holding Sophie with the other. "I need to think about this." Daniel stood too, desperate not to let her leave like this. "Laura, please, let me explain properly. Let me make this right." "Make it right?" She paused, and when she looked at him again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Daniel, you're a billionaire. I'm a single mother who can't even afford formula without help. There is no making this right. There's just the reality that we live in completely different worlds, and I was stupid to think otherwise, even for a few weeks." She left before he could respond, disappearing into the Oakland afternoon with Sophie's cries fading into the street noise. Daniel stood there for several minutes, aware of other patrons glancing at him curiously, before finally leaving himself. He sat in his car for a long time, not starting the engine, just staring at nothing. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Daniel's life. He didn't text Laura, respecting her need for space, even as it killed him to maintain the silence. He threw himself into work, but found himself distracted in meetings, staring at reports without seeing them, making decisions without his usual certainty. His assistant noticed. His board noticed, but no one said anything. Daniel Chen didn't have personal problems. Daniel Chen was pure professional efficiency. Then, late on a Thursday night, his phone buzzed. Laura's name appeared on the screen and his heart jumped. The message was brief. I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to help without it being transactional. I need you to understand something. I don't need rescuing. I don't need a billionaire to swoop in and fix my life. What I needed was someone who saw me as a person. Can you be that person? Daniel stared at the message for a long time before responding. I want to try, but I don't know how to separate who I am from what I have. It's been so long since I was just a person instead of a position. Then maybe we both need to learn, Laura wrote back. I need to learn that accepting help doesn't make me weak. And you need to learn that helping people isn't about the size of the gesture. They met again, this time at a park near Laura's apartment. It was a small neighborhood space with rusted playground equipment and patchy grass, worlds away from the manicured corporate campuses Daniel usually inhabited. Laura was pushing Sophie in a worn baby swing when he arrived, and she watched him approach with an expression that was guarded, but not hostile. I got you something, Daniel said, pulling out a small envelope. Laura's expression immediately shuttered. If this is a check, I don't want it. It's not, Daniel assured her. It's information about Chen Digital Solutions' new initiative. We're creating a legal apprenticeship program for people who couldn't finish law school, paid positions, flexible hours, childcare support, and a path to taking the bar exam. I wanted you to know about it before we announce it publicly. Laura took the envelope slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. You created this because of me. I created it because you reminded me that there are thousands of people like you. Smart, capable people who got knocked down by circumstances and just need a chance to get back up. People my company should be investing in instead of just optimizing away. She opened the envelope, scanning the information inside, and Daniel watched her expression shift as she processed what she was reading. This is real. This isn't just for me. It's real. We're starting with 50 positions across 4 cities. It'll probably grow from there. Daniel hesitated, then continued. I'm not offering to fix your life, Laura. I'm offering an opportunity. You'd have to apply like everyone else. You'd have to earn it. But I thought you should know it exists. Laura looked at Sophie, still swinging gently, then back at Daniel. You're trying to change things, really change them. I'm trying to be someone my mother would recognize, Daniel said quietly. Someone who remembers where he came from and what it took to get here. You helped me see that I'd lost that somewhere along the way. They talked for hours after that, real conversation without pretense, about what it meant to help people, about the responsibility that came with wealth, about the distance between intention and impact. Laura challenged him, pushed back when he made things sound easier than they were, called him out when he slipped into corporate speak. And Daniel listened, really listened in a way he hadn't done in years. The legal apprenticeship program launched 3 months later. Laura was among the first cohort, having earned her position through a competitive application process that Daniel had deliberately removed himself from. He kept his distance, letting her build her new career on her own merits, though he followed her progress through official reports with more interest than he'd ever shown quarterly earnings. They stayed in touch, occasional messages that were friendly but boundaried, two people who'd met under strange circumstances and were carefully navigating what came next. Sophie turned 1, then 18 months. Laura passed her first apprenticeship evaluations with high marks. Daniel restructured Chen Digital Solutions to focus more on social impact, weathering pushback from shareholders who didn't understand why profit wasn't the only metric that mattered. It was at the apprenticeship program's 1-year celebration that they finally talked about what they'd become to each other. Laura had brought Sophie, now a toddler, taking unsteady steps and babbling constant commentary, and after the formal presentations, they found themselves alone for a moment near the refreshments table. Thank you, Laura said simply, for creating something that changed my life, for doing it in a way that let me change it myself. Thank you, Daniel replied, for reminding me why any of this matters, for not letting me take the easy way out. Sophie chose that moment to toddle over to Daniel, her small hands reaching up in the universal toddler demand to be held. Daniel looked at Laura for permission, and when she nodded, he picked up the little girl carefully, amazed as always by how light she was, how fragile and how resilient all at once. "She doesn't remember that you're the one who bought her first formula," Laura said softly. "But I'll make sure she knows someday that sometimes strangers become the most important people in our lives, that sometimes getting help is the bravest thing we can do." Daniel held Sophie, feeling her small hands pat his face with unself-conscious affection, and thought about all the ways one desperate text message at 2 in the morning had changed everything. He thought about the person he'd been before, the person he was becoming, and the long road still ahead of learning how to use privilege in service of something larger than himself. "Maybe we don't need to call it a debt repaid or a lesson learned," he said. "Maybe it's just two people who helped each other become better than they were before." Laura smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that reminded Daniel why he'd wanted to help her in the first place. Not because she needed saving, but because she deserved a chance. Because everyone did. "I can live with that," she said. They stood there together, watching Sophie explore her small universe with fearless curiosity. Two people from different worlds who'd found unexpected connection in the space between wealth and need, between giving and receiving, between who we are and who we might become if we're brave enough to change. Sometimes help arrives from unexpected places. Sometimes a wrong number becomes exactly right. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is not our resources, but our recognition of their worth. And sometimes in learning to help others, we discover how much we needed help ourselves. The distance between our worlds is vast, but never as insurmountable as we imagine. What matters isn't where we start or what we have, but whether we're willing to see each other as fully human, equally deserving of dignity and hope and second chances. In the end, that recognition changes everything.